The first time I found out my stepson had shut off my credit cards, I was standing at the pharmacy counter in front of half the town I had barbered for 52 years, and the machine beeped at me like I was a shoplifter. When I called him from the parking lot, he did not say hello, and he did not say dad. He said, "We turned the cards off, Harold. You will thank us later." Harold. I raised that boy from the time he was 10 years old. I taught him to drive a stick shift in the church lot on Sunday afternoons. I sat up with him the night his first father did not show for his birthday, and I never once said a word against the man. And standing there in the cold with a little white bag of blood pressure pills I could not pay for, what broke me was not the cards. It was my own first name coming out of his mouth like I was a customer he was letting down easy. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that 6 weeks earlier, in a quiet office 90 miles away, a woman he had never met had already opened a file with his name on it. Because when he shut off those cards, he pulled a thread. And that thread rang a bell in a room he did not even know existed. My name is Cy Bellamy. Folks here have called me Cy since before Eisenhower left office. I am 77 years old, and I have cut hair in the same 2 chairs, under the same slow-ceiling fan, in the same brick shop on Main Street in Walnut Gap, Missouri, for 52 years. Before we go on, do something for an old barber. Down in the comments, tell me who cut your hair when you were a boy. A town shop with a striped pole, a kitchen chair, and your mother's sewing scissors, an army clipper that took it all in 40 seconds. I read every one of those, usually in the quiet hour before I flip the sign, and I promise you, your answer will make some stranger somewhere smile before bed. Now, let me tell you how a man can lose his whole standing in a family without anybody raising a voice. And let me tell you about the well. Walnut Gap sits down in the Ozarks, in Dennard County, where the hills fold over each other like a rumpled quilt, and the fog comes up off the creek so thick some mornings you could butter it. My shop is one of 2 brick storefronts that stand shoulder to shoulder on the north side of Maine. The other one was my wife's. Fern ran the flower shop next door for 40 years. We shared a wall, and we had a code. 2 knocks in the morning meant the coffee is made. 1 knock meant, "Come see this." The day she found a hummingbird nest in the wreath hooks, 1 knock. The day the doctor in Springfield first said the word Parkinson's, 1 knock, and I went around, and we stood among the buckets of carnations and held on to each other like 2 people standing in a creek that had started to rise. That was 10 years ago. She fought it the way she did everything, tidy and cheerful and on her own terms, for 7 years. She has been gone 3. I still have not learned how to make coffee for 1. I measure for 2 every morning, and I drink her cup too, and I do not care to be talked out of it. A barber does not just cut hair. A barber holds a town's whole life in a mirror, 20 minutes at a time. I lathered the faces of men home from Korea when I was a boy, sweeping my father's floor. In 1969, the Army looked at my hands and put me in a barber shop at Fort Leonard Wood, 2 hours up the road, shearing scared 18-year-olds smooth as river rock before they shipped out. Some of them did not come home. I still remember the shape of their heads under my hands. And on the shelf below my mirror, on a folded towel, lies my father's straight razor, bone handle gone the color of weak tea. His initials scratched in the tang by his own pocket knife. Beside it hangs his strop, a length of leather worn soft and dark as a saddle. Every morning of my working life, first thing, before the lights, before the coffee, I draw that razor down the strop, slow, both sides. My father taught me the reason, and it is not what most people think. The strop does not sharpen a razor. There is nothing in soft leather that can grind steel. What the strop does is straighten. A razor's edge is so fine that just shaving a man bends it sideways, microscopic and visible, but enough. You draw it down the leather, and the leather stands the edge back up. True. Daddy used to say a man's name works the same way. The world will bend it every single day, he said. Little dings, little lies. You strop it every morning, son, and it will still be standing straight when they lay you down. I have thought about that leather more this past year than in the 50 before it, because the story I need to tell you starts with ice on a set of brick steps, and a phone call I never should have made, and the discovery that a man can spend 31 years being somebody's father and get demoted to a first name in 1 February. It started with the fall. Second week of February, there came an ice storm that glazed the whole county like a donut. I salted my steps, same as every winter, but I was carrying a box of towels and I could not see my feet, and the third step had other ideas. I heard the hip crack before I felt it. Lay there maybe 4 minutes, breath knocked sideways, watching my own steam rise, until Alma Fisk from the quilt shop across the street saw me through her window and came running in her house shoes. Surgery in Springfield, a new ball for the old socket, and then 6 weeks at the rehabilitation center out on Route W, learning to walk again behind one of those wheeled walkers with the tennis balls on the feet. Me in a hallway full of other proud old men all pretending we were only there for the company. And Randy stepped up. I want to be fair about this part because fair is the only way I know how to tell a story. Randy is Fern's boy by her first husband, a man who went off for a better life and never sent so much as a postcard back. I married Fern when Randy was 10. I never adopted him formal because his mother thought keeping his daddy's name might keep a door open in the boy's heart, and I respected that, though the door never once got a knock. He grew up over my shop, did his homework in chair number 2, swept hair for pocket money. He is 54 now, sells equipment for a big outfit out of Springfield, and drives a truck so clean it looks like it is apologizing for the roads. His wife is Krista, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a tired mouth. Their girl Katie is 19, and that child has been in and out of my shop her whole life like a barn swallow. While I was flat on my back, Randy collected my mail. He watered nothing, because Fern's plants have long outlived my ability to keep them, but he handled things. That was his word. Handled. Do not worry about a thing, he kept saying. We have got it all handled. And I said thank you, and I meant it. And if you have ever lain in a rented bed at 77 while your body decides whether it plans to keep you, you know how sweet those words can sound going down. They only turn bitter later, when you find out what all got handled. I came home the last week of March, on a cane, to a house that smelled like somebody else's cleaning products. By April, I was back at the shop half days. My hands were never the problem. Put me behind a man's head with a pair of shears, and I am not a day over 40. The town came back to me like water finding its ditch. It felt like getting well. Then came the second Tuesday in April. Woolsey's Rexall drug has stood on the corner of Main and 3rd since before I was born. Alan Woolsey the younger runs it now. Every month, same ritual, I pick up my blood pressure pills and a roll of wintergreen mints, and Alan and I complain about the fishing. That Tuesday there was a line behind me. The Dean sisters, a young mother with a baby on her hip, dubbed Cutler from the VFW who has a voice you can hear across a lake. Alan ran my card. The machine beeped. Declined, he said, and he said it kind, but a word like that does not have a kind size. Run it again, I said, beeped again. I got out my other card, the one I keep for emergencies. Declined. The young mother lifted her shoes. One of the Dean sisters whispered something to the other, and I felt it land on my back like sleet. 52 years, I have stood at the front of this town, and in 4 beeps I turned into a confused old man holding up the line. Alan, bless him forever, reached under the counter and said, Cy, your credit is the best in 3 counties. Take the pills. We will sort the machine later. The machine. He gave the shame a place to sit that was not on me. Remember that kindness. There was going to be a test on it later, for somebody. Out in the lot, in the cold, I called Randy. And you already know what he said, and how he said it, and which name he used. But I have not told you the whole of it. After he said, we turned the cards off. Harold, you will thank us later. I stood there a second and asked him, plain as I could, why? And I heard him take a breath. The kind you take when you have practiced a thing in the truck mirror. He said, Cy, you are 77. You had a bad fall. Things slip. We are just simplifying while we still can do it the easy way. While we still can. The easy way. I have replayed those 3 phrases more times than I care to admit, the way your tongue keeps finding the tooth that broke. I did not holler. Men my age get exactly 1 hollering fit in public per year, and I was not going to spend mine in the Rexall parking lot. I said, all right, son, thank you for looking out. And I heard, so help me, relief. He believed me. It cost him nothing at all to believe that 31 years of me could be folded up that easy, like a road map, and put in the glove box. I got in my truck. But I did not drive home. I drove to the Dennard County Community Credit Union, and what the manager turned around on her screen made the pharmacy feel like the good part of my week. Bonnie Speck has managed that credit union for going on 20 years, and I have known her since she was a teller with braces. She took one look at my face and walked me back to her office without a word, which is a kind of fluency you only get in a small town. She pulled up my accounts, and I watched her stop being friendly and start being careful, which in a banker is the same as a dog raising its hackles. Cy, she said, did you change your mailing address in February? No, ma'am. I was flat on my back in February. The screen says your statements have been going to an address in Springfield since the 9th. She turned the monitor. It was Randy Street, Randy's house number. Then it came in a slow, dirty rain, 1 drop at a time. The phone number on the account changed to Randy's cell. My paper statement switched off entirely. Everything moved to an email address I did not recognize, which turned out to be a new one, made for my own name that I had never once typed in my life. My debit card, reported, lost the 3rd week of February, reissued, and mailed to Springfield. I never reported that card lost. It was in my wallet the whole time, dead as a pocket watch with no mainspring. and I had used cash from my dresser for 6 weeks without thinking a thing of it because a man in a walker has bigger worries. And a note on the file. Son called. Requested information on adding himself for account monitoring. Advised he would need proper authority. He asked what kind. What kind? Those 2 words sat on my chest like a wet dog. Now here's the part I want every one of you to hear, because this is the part nobody warned you about. Bonnie went through every transaction with me for an hour, and not $1 was missing. Not one. Nobody had bought a boat with my money. If it had been plain stealing, I believe it would have hurt less, because stealing is at least honest about what it is. What we were looking at was tidier and colder. Somebody was not taking my money. Somebody was gathering up my keys, the mailbox key, the account key, the information key. One at a time, quiet, patient, each one with a perfectly reasonable story stapled to it, until the day would come when every door in my own life would need his hand to open. Bonnie printed it all. Dates, changes, the address, the phone number. Then she sat back and said the thing that turned my spine to rebar. Cy, one more thing. Couple weeks back, a man phoned here asking whether the credit union held any liens on your 2 buildings on Main. Said he was calling for the family. We do not hold paper on your buildings. You have owned them free and clear for 30 years, and I told him nothing. But you ought to know somebody is out there measuring your fences. I drove home the long way, out past the fairgrounds, because I needed the extra miles. And the whole drive my memory did that awful thing a memory does when somebody hands it a flashlight. It went back through the last year turning over rocks. Christmas. Randy at my kitchen table with a legal pad. Pop, we got to get a handle on your paperwork one of these days. Where do you even keep the important stuff? Me laughing it off, saying important is a strong word for a shoebox. Him not laughing back. Thanksgiving before that. Randy asking out of a clear blue sky whatever happened to the money from your mama's farm. Krista, did you know month over month had land money once? The way a man asks a question just to see what you will say? Fern's folks had 300 acres of river bottom up in Cedar County, and when her daddy passed, we sold it. That much was old news in 2 counties. Where that money went and how it was held was nobody's business but mine, Fern's, and one office in Springfield. And the rehab center. Krista visiting, sweet as always, leaving a glossy folder on my tray table. Maple Terrace. Senior living with dignity. A shuttle bus full of smiling silver-haired people with suspiciously good teeth. I thought it was a kindness aimed wrong. That night, I lay in the dark, wondering if it had been aimed exactly right, just not at my happiness. You see how it works. Not one of those moments, by itself, weighs an ounce. A son helping with mail, a brochure, a question at dinner. You could not take a single one of them to a sheriff or even to a sister without sounding like a paranoid old fool. That is the design of the thing. That is what makes it work. The whole trick is built out of parts that each look like love. I did not sleep much. Along about 3 in the morning, I got up, went down to the kitchen, and poured out the cold coffee from Fern's cup and washed it and set it in the rack. Then I stood at the window a long while, looking down Main at the dark shape of my shop and her shop, shoulder to shoulder, brick on brick. And I said out loud, to nobody, to her, "All right, Fernie, I hear you. Nice and easy. First we find out how deep the water is. Then we decide how to swim." In the morning, I called Leland Fry. Leland has lawyered in Walnut Gap for 40 years out of an office above the old feed store, with a window air conditioner that sounds like a B-17 and a filing system no man alive but him can operate. He has handled things for Fern and me since the Carter administration. I will tell you exactly what all he has handled, but not yet. I want you to hear this in the order I lived it. For now, know only this. 8 years ago, the spring after the doctors put a name to what was coming for Fern, she and I spent 3 long afternoons in that office doing what Leland called putting the crops in the barn while the sky was still blue. Hold on to that sentence. We are coming back for it. I laid it all out across his desk. The cards, the address, the dead debit card, the phone call about my buildings. Leland listened the way he fishes, no wasted motion, and when I finished, he took off his glasses and polished them on his tie, which is what he does instead of cussing. "Cyrus," he said, "here is the hardest advice I own. Do nothing. I beg your pardon. Do not call Randy. Do not accuse. Do not change one lock or one password in any way he can see. Right now that boy believes the gate is open and nobody is minding the pasture. A man only checks his back trail when he suspects somebody is on it. Let him walk easy. Walking easy, he will leave tracks. And what do I do while he leaves them? You buy a notebook," Leland said. "Every call, every visit, every kindly little suggestion, you write down the day, the hour, and the exact words. Courts do not weigh feelings, Cy. Courts weigh paper. Sworn, dated, boring paper, and the man with the better boring paper wins. So I became a spy in my own life, which is the loneliest occupation ever invented. I bought the notebook at the dollar store and kept it under the towels below the register, and it filled faster than I ever dreamed. You would be amazed what you start seeing once you quit explaining things away. I ran little tests too, and I am not ashamed of it. I mentioned to Randy that I meant to order a new pair of German shears, professional grade, $400. A pause, and then, real gentle, why not hold off on big purchases till we get your finances organized, Pop? I mentioned to Krista that Dub Cutler and I were driving to Branson for the Gospel Jubilee like we do most Mays. She said, "With your hip, do you think that is wise?" You notice the shape of it. Never, no, never once, no. Just wait, just hold off. Just, is that wise? Every suggestion pointed the same direction toward a smaller life, and every one of them was dressed up in my own good. Then the tracks started showing up in other people's yards. A Tuesday toward the end of April, a young fellow in a pressed shirt came in between heads and said he was with a commercial real estate outfit up in Springfield, and that he understood the 2 Bellamy buildings might be coming available in the fall, and they would love the listing. The shears in my hand never paused, which I count among the finest performances of my life. I said, "Son, you are the first to tell me my own news." He left without leaving a card. Then church. First Sunday of May, after the service, Eula Grantham caught my sleeve at coffee hour with her face doing that thing where sympathy and curiosity get in the same canoe. "Cy, honey," she said, "we are all just sick about you leaving us." Leaving. "Well," she said, "Randy told the men's class you would likely be up in Springfield by Thanksgiving, closer to family, and did the church want the buildings for the youth annex, because they might be for sale, reasonable." I stood there holding a paper cup of orange drink, while my own future got passed around the fellowship hall like a plate of deviled eggs. Everybody in that room had heard the plan for my life except me. And then I found the letter. Going through the grocery sack of mail Randy had handed back after rehab, between a seed catalog and the electric co-op newsletter, there it was. An official notice from the United States Postal Service addressed to me, dated the middle of February. "We received a request to forward your mail. If you did not make this request, contact us." The government had done its level best to warn me. The warning had simply been riding in the same wagon as everything else he took. That night, the phone rang. Randy, cheerful as a game show host. "Pop, come to Sunday dinner. Krista is doing her chicken, and there is somebody we want you to meet. He has helped a whole lot of families like ours get squared away." I looked at Fern's picture by the phone, and I said, "Sure, son. I will bring the rolls." And that, friends, is how I drove to Springfield to shake hands with the man who had been drawing up the plans for my leftover years, before he had ever laid eyes on me. His name was Brock Tillman. "Call me Brock," he said, "everybody does." And I thought, I expect they call you a few other things too once the paperwork settles. Maybe 50, golfer's tan, wedding band the size of a socket, and he called himself a family wealth strategist, which as near as I can tell is a job you get by printing cards that say it. He said the word proactive 9 times before the pie. I counted because counting kept my face polite. Then out came the folder. Leather, brass corner, and a label. The Bellamy Pre-Wit Family Roadmap. My name and Randy's married together on a cover, snug as a headstone. Inside was my life as guessed at by strangers. The house, the 2 buildings on Main, a line that said estimated farm proceeds with a question mark, and a number beside the question mark that was not even in the right county. Then a page of what Brock called action steps. Consolidate the accounts for oversight. A durable power of attorney naming Randy. A trust with Brock's outfit doing the managing at a fee he called industry standard, and I would call it tick, describing itself as a passenger. And at the bottom, printed pretty as a hymn, transition planning for the real property on Main Street. Transition planning. For my shop. For Fern's shop. Words like that are how people sell you your own funeral and bill you for the flowers. Randy slid a pen across the table. "Just the first page tonight, Pop. It only gets the conversation started." Now let me give the younger folks the one-house rule that has saved me more money than every bank in Missouri. I do not sign anything on the same day it is handed to me. Not a raffle ticket, not a birthday card, nothing. A paper that cannot wait overnight is a paper that cannot survive overnight, and both of those facts tell you the same thing. So I patted that folder like a good dog and said, "Boys, this is a lot of thinking you have done on my behalf. Let me take her home and read her slow. My eyes are not what they were. And here is the moment I want you to see." Brock smiled wider because the salesman hears maybe and books the commission. But Krista, clearing the dessert plates, went still for about a second and a half with her back to the table. A woman's back can talk when her mouth is not allowed to. I did not know yet what hers was saying. I only wrote in the notebook that night that it had said something. Randy walked me to my truck, hand under my elbow like I was made of stemware. And at the door, he said the thing that told me the clock was running faster than I knew. He said, "Pop, do not take too long on that folder. Summer is coming," and fall right behind it, and we would sure hate to be doing all this in a hurry. "Doing all what in a hurry?" I asked him, friendly as pie. He patted the truck roof twice and said, "Drive safe, Harold." Twice in one spring, my own first name, from the boy I taught to shave. I drove home through the dark with my hands at 10 and 2 and my mind at about 110, because I knew then that waiting him out was only half a plan. A man who has already told the church and the realtor needs my life to change by fall? Need is a locomotive. You do not stand on the track and reason with it. You switch the rails. So the next week, quiet as dust, I did 3 things. I went to see Dr. Prasad, who has kept me running for 20 years, and asked her for the full going over, memory questions and all. She asked why. I told her the truth. She got very quiet, and then she got very thorough, and when it was done, she wrote a letter on her letterhead, dated and signed, saying Cy Bellamy is alert, oriented, and fully capable of managing his own personal and financial affairs. 1 copy in my chart. 1 copy in my hand. I renewed my barber license, which the state of Missouri was glad to do for a man with 52 years and not 1 complaint on file, and I framed it and hung it beside the old ones. And I drove to Springfield, to a quiet office I had not walked into in almost a year, and sat down with a woman named Paula Grimes. What we went over in that room is the whole hinge of this story, and I will tell you every bit of it shortly. For now, know only that I walked out of that building lighter than I went in, and stopped on the sidewalk in the sun and laughed, 1 short bark, like a man remembering the punchline to a joke his wife told him 8 years ago. That Saturday evening I stood a long while by Fern's peony bed. She planted those the year Katie was born, big, soft blooms the color of a bride's cheek, so heavy they bow clean over and rest their faces in the dirt, and they come back every year no matter what the winter did. I told her all of it out loud. The cards, the folder, the roadmap with both our names on it, and I will swear to my last day that the wind came through those peonies like a woman brushing crumbs off a table she has already wiped once. Monday morning, 10:15, I was dropping the razor between customers when a young man in a windbreaker came into the shop holding a manila envelope and asked, real apologetic, "Are you Cy Bellamy?" And my whole chest already knew. He was a process server out of Springfield. "Sorry to do this here, sir," he said, and I told him, "Son, a man that hands you the truth is never the one who ought to apologize." I had 2 customers in the shop, Dub Cutler in chair 1, half-shaved. Little Marcus Dean, 9 years old, sitting on the bench with his mother waiting on a summer cut. I set the envelope face down on the shelf beside the razor, and I finished Dub's neck, and I cut that little boy's hair, and I talked about the Cardinals' bullpen the entire time, as if my life were not sitting 8 inches from my hand. When the door shut behind them, I locked it, turned the sign, and sat down in chair number 2, which is where I sit when I need to think, and I opened it. A petition, filed in the probate division of the Circuit Court of Dennard County, in the matter of Cy Bellamy, alleged incapacitated and disabled person, petitioner Randall Prewitt. He asked the court to find that I could not receive and evaluate information or communicate decisions well enough to meet my own basic needs, and to appoint him guardian of my person and conservator of my estate. Guardian of my person, sit with that a minute, not of my money. Of my person, of me, where I live, who comes in the door, whether I go to Branson with Dub Cutler in May. Attached was a physician statement, signed by a doctor I had met exactly 1 time, for 11 minutes, in a walk-in clinic in Springfield the day after that Sunday dinner when Randy pulled off the highway and said, "Pop, while we were in town, let us just get that cough looked at." I had wondered why a man with a cough needed to answer what year it was and count backward from 100 by 7s. Now I knew. He had driven me to my own examination and bought me a milkshake after. There was a list of reasons. Fell in February, hospitalized, confused about finances, cards declined at pharmacy, handles, cash irregularly, resistant to reasonable planning, lives alone in a home with stairs, continues to operate a business involving sharp instruments at age 77. Sharp instruments. 52 years and not 1 nick worth of bandage, and a razor turns into evidence. And every line of it was technically true. That is the part I want the folks watching to understand, because it is the whole cruelty of the thing. He did not have to lie much. He built the case out of true little bricks, and the mortar was the 4 beeps of a card machine that he himself had switched off. He turned off the cards, and then he entered the shame he caused as proof of the decline he claimed. I sat in chair 2, a long while, in a locked shop, looking at my own name in a court's language. Alleged incapacitated. It is a strange thing to read, a paper whose whole purpose is to move you out of the driver's seat of your own life and file you under other people's business. Then I did the only thing I know to do when my chest gets tight. I stood up, took down my daddy's razor, and stropped it. Down, flip, 40 strokes. And somewhere in there my breathing came back, and so did my sense. Because a bent edge, Daddy used to say, cannot straighten itself while it is working. I had been letting the days bend my name for a year and calling it peace. Now. Before I tell you what was waiting for them, I want to say one thing to whoever is out there. If you have ever been the steady one in a family, the one everybody leaned on for 30 years, and then one day found yourself talked about in the third person while you were still standing in the room, go ahead and subscribe. Not for me, because there's a whole crowd of us in this comment section, and it helps to know the room is full. All right, come with me back to Springfield, to that quiet office, and let me tell you what my wife and I did 8 years ago on 3 long afternoons while the sky was still blue. Fern was diagnosed on a Thursday. By the following Monday, she had a list, because that was Fern, and item 1 on the list said, Leland, everything, now, not later. She had watched her own mother's last 4 years get decided by a committee of relatives at a kitchen table, and she said to me, Cy, I will not have a committee, and neither will you. So we sat in that office over the feed store, and we put the crops in the barn. 3 things. First, we had the farm money to deal with. Her folks' 300 acres of Cedar County bottom ground sold for a fair price back in the 80s, and after taxes and 30 years of careful, we had a little better than $140,000 of it left. Fern's care was going to eat some of that, and it did, about half. And the rest, she said, does not go into a pot for people to fight over after I am gone. Put it somewhere it cannot be argued with. So we gave it. Irrevocably, that is the lawyer's word, meaning gone from our hands forever with no takebacks, to the Dennard County Community Foundation as the Cy Bellamy Fund. 2 purposes, written by her in her handwriting, still in the file. Scholarships for young people from this county going to a trade school. Barbering, cosmetology, welding, diesel, nursing, the honest trades, and fresh flowers on the communion table at First Christian every Sunday of the year, forever, so that nobody in Walnut Gap ever has to look at plastic ones. That money had not been mine for 8 years, which means the biggest line in Brock Tillman's leather folder, estimated farm proceeds, ? Was a line item on a ghost. Second, my 2 buildings, free and clear, both of them since 1994. We left them exactly where they were, in my name, on purpose, because Fern said a man ought to own the floor he stands on. But we wrote what happens to them in a will I have not changed and will not discuss with anybody but my lawyer. And third, the one that mattered. The one Randy never dreamed to look for. Because 8 years ago, sitting in that office with my wife's hand on my knee, I signed a durable power of attorney, and I did not name family. I named a woman named Paula Grimes. She is a licensed professional fiduciary out of Springfield, bonded, regulated, and paid by the hour like a plumber, which is exactly what I wanted. Leland brought me 3 candidates, and I picked her because when I asked her what she would do if my son called her wanting money, she did not say I would look into it. She said I would tell him no, and then I would tell you, he asked. And in that same document, on the page Leland calls the important boring page, Fern and I wrote something else, a nomination. In plain words, it says that if a court ever has to appoint somebody to look after my person or my property, I nominate Paula Grimes, and I specifically decline the appointment of any family member. My reasons are written right there in my own words, dated, witnessed, and notarized 8 years before anybody ever thought to call me confused. It says I love my family, and I do not wish to be their business. Now, I am not a lawyer, and I will not play one. I will only tell you what Leland told me on the day and what he told me again in April. In Missouri, a court is not required to hand your life to whoever files first. A judge is required to weigh who is suitable, and the law gives real weight to a written nomination made by the person themselves while they still had every bit of their wits. Paperwork. You sign in the good years, votes for you in the bad ones. That is not a loophole. That is the whole point of the thing. So on the second Monday of April, when Randall Prewitt walked into a lawyer's office in Springfield and started a petition to be made guardian and conservator of a barber in Walnut Gap, he was walking into a race that had already been run. Here is how the bell rang. Back in February, while I was learning to walk again, Randy called the credit union and asked Bonnie Speck what kind of authority he would need to manage his father's accounts. Bonnie told him nothing, because she is good at her job. But my file there has carried a standing instruction for 8 years. Any question about authority over these accounts gets reported to the named agent under the power of attorney. Not to me, to her, because Fern thought of that too. Fern said, Cy, if somebody's ever working on you, you will be the last man in Missouri to believe it. So a woman my stepson had never met opened a file in February and started keeping copies. The address change, the phone number, a debit card reported lost by somebody who was not me and mailed to a house that was not mine. She never called me about any of it because I had told her in writing 8 years earlier not to bring me suspicions, only facts. And on the morning my cards beeped 4 times at Woolsey's Rexall, Paula Grimes was already sitting on 11 weeks of them. That is what I meant when I said he pulled a thread. Leland called me the Thursday after I was served, and his voice had a new sound in it, the sound of a man who has been fishing all day and has finally felt the line move. "Cyrus," he said, "Paula has something, and I do not want to say it on a telephone." I drove up. She had a conference room with a bad print of a lighthouse on the wall and the best coffee I had all spring, and she laid down 3 things. 2 of them I already half knew. The credit union changes, everyone submitted through the online portal on February the 9th, everyone carrying a typed electronic signature reading Cyrus L. Bellamy, all of them from an internet address at a house in Springfield, and the postal forwarding request from that same week in a hand that was not mine. The third, she slid across last and turned right side up for me, the way Bonnie had turned that monitor. I have decided a piece of paper being turned to face me is the sound my whole life makes now when it changes. It was a fee agreement. Brought Tillman's outfit, laying out what his firm stood to earn on the Bellamy engagement, a percentage of assets brought under management, a separate percentage on real estate transitions, meaning if my 2 buildings on Main sold, he ate off that too. And in the notes column, in a hand as neat as a nurse's, a line that has been printed on the inside of my eyelids ever since. Family motivated. Move before September. Confirm no third-party fiduciary on file. Confirm no third-party fiduciary on file. He knew to look. He had done this before, and he had not looked hard enough because 8 years ago a florist with a shaking hand told a lawyer to write it down. Paula asked me what I wanted to do. She said we could go straight at it, file our objection, put the doctor's letter and the nomination in front of the judge, and it would likely be over in a morning. Randy would get a lecture and a dismissal, and everybody would go home and never speak of it. And I sat there in that conference room and I thought about Alan Woolsey reaching under the counter for me. I thought about the Dean sisters whispering. I thought about Eula Grantham telling me I was leaving. I thought about a 9-year-old boy in my chair listening to me talk about the Cardinals while a court paper lay 8 inches from my hand. And I said, Paula, no. He did not do this to me in a courthouse. He did it to me in front of my town. If it ends in a room with 3 lawyers and a judge, then in Walnut Gap, I will be the old barber whose family had to go to court over him, world without end. Amen. Cheap talk outlives cheap paper. Leland took his glasses off. What are you proposing? I said, he wants a signature. Let him come get it. Saturday morning, first Saturday in June at the shop, tell him I have read the folder and I am ready. Tell him to bring Brock. Tell him to bring the pen. Leland said, Cy, that shop will be full on a Saturday. And I said, I certainly hope so. There were 4 weeks between that conference room and that Saturday, and they were the strangest of my 77 years, because I had to keep being an old man who did not know. Randy called twice, and both times I was warm to him. The second time he said, Pop, none of this is about money. And I said, Son, I believe you believe that, which is the truest sentence I spoke all spring. Krista called once on a Wednesday, and there was a long pause after hello. She said, Cy, are you all right? I said, I am upright and my hands are steady. And she said, I want you to know I did not know about the doctor. Then she said, I have to go, and hung up so fast the phone was still warm when I set it down. I wrote that in the notebook and underlined it twice, not because it was evidence, because there was still a person in there. I also called Katie down to the shop, which I had been putting off a year. 19 years old, taking business classes at the community college because that is what people tell a smart girl to take. I did not mention the petition because that was her father's to tell. I only asked her what she actually wanted. She looked at the floor and said, Grandpa, do not laugh at me. And then she said she wanted to cut hair. Said she had wanted it since she was 7 years old, sitting on my footrest handing me combs. I laughed the way a man laughs when a door he never knew was in the wall swings open. And I told her there is a fund in this county built for exactly that. And her grandmother built it, and it is not charity, and she was going to fill out the form. Now. The first Saturday in June. A barbershop on a Saturday in a town like mine is not a business. It is a service in the church sense. Coffee at 6:30, the farmers and the highway crew at 7, the deer camp arguments at 9, boys with their mothers at 11. That morning, though, I had made a few quiet invitations of my own, and by 9 o'clock the shop was as full as it has been since we watched the moon landing on the little television on the shelf. Dub Cutler in the corner in his VFW cap. Alan Woolsey from the drugstore on his morning off. Bonnie Speck from the credit union, in blue jeans which none of us had ever seen. Alma Fisk, who picked me up off the ice in February. Eula Grantham, who I called personally because a woman who spreads news honestly is exactly who you want in the room when the news gets corrected. Pastor Dean Voiles and a dozen more along the wall by the old bench. Leland Fry in chair 1 with a towel around his neck like he fully intended to get a shave. Paula Grimes on a folding stool by the register with a black case at her feet. And back in the storeroom doorway, out of the way, a plainclothes investigator from the county prosecutor's office named Lyle Dooms, who drank 3 cups of my coffee. 9:20, Randy's truck pulled up. Brock Tillman's car right behind it, and Krista, who was not expected, coming out of the passenger side with her purse held against her chest like a shield. They came in and Randy stopped 2 steps inside the door, taking in the crowd, and I watched his face do arithmetic. And then, God love him, he decided the crowd was good news. He decided he had an audience for the day he took care of his father. He actually squared his shoulders. "Morning, Pop," he said loud, for the room. "Morning, son. Have a seat." I gestured at chair number 2, my thinking chair, and he sat in it. And I want you to know I did not put a cape on him and I never touched a blade the whole time. That razor stayed on its towel on the shelf where it has laid since Eisenhower. This was never going to be that kind of morning. Brock started right in. He had the leather folder. He said, "Mr. Bellamy, we are all so pleased." He said, "This is really a wonderful step." He said the word proactive twice before he found a place to stand. I said, "Brock, before we sign anything, I want to read something out loud, since we have got the whole town here." "That fair?" Randy said, "Sure, Pop." I picked up the manila envelope off the shelf, and I read the caption of the petition out loud, slow, the way you read scripture. In the matter of Cy Bellamy, alleged incapacitated and disabled person, petitioner Randall Prewitt. You have never heard a room go so quiet that you could hear the ceiling fan bearings. Eula Grantham said, "Oh, Randy." Randy came half out of the chair. "Pop, that is not that is a protective step. That is just to make sure nobody takes advantage of you." I said, "Son, I want to be honest with you about something. That is the sentence I have said to men in this chair for 52 years right before I tell them they are going bald. Nobody has taken advantage of me. Yet." Then I laid down the second thing. Dr. Prasad's letter, dated in May, on her letterhead, I read the last line out loud. Alert, oriented, and fully capable of managing his own personal and financial affairs. I set it on the shelf next to my framed license, the new one, renewed in May, and I did not have to say a word about that. 12 people looked at it, and the arithmetic was done. And then Leland Fry stood up out of chair 1 with the towel still around his neck, and he said, "Randall, I am not here as a guest." He pulled the towel off and folded it, which somehow made it worse for them, and he opened a plain accordion file on my counter, and he went one layer at a time. Leland does not raise his voice. He has never needed to. He talks like a man reading off a level. Layer 1. He read the nomination. He read it word for word, dated 8 years back, witnessed, notarized, in my own words, that I decline the appointment of any family member and that I nominate Paula Grimes, licensed professional fiduciary, and here is Miss Grimes, and she has been the agent under Mr. Bellamy's durable power of attorney since that same afternoon. Brock Tillman set his coffee down. I watched him do it. He set the cup down, and he did not pick it back up, and I have never seen a man's whole billing plan die so quietly on a shelf. Randy said, "Since when?" Leland said, "Since 8 years ago this month. Your mother was sitting to his left." Layer 2. The credit union forms. Bonnie Speck did not have to leave her stool. Leland read the date and the time. February the 9th, 2:40 in the afternoon. Electronic signature Cyrus L. Bellamy, submitted from an internet address in Springfield. And then he read one more line off a rehabilitation center chart. February the 9th, 2:30 to 3:15. Gait training, patient and therapy gym, 2 staff present. Signed. There was a sound in that room, like a whole crowd deciding not to breathe. Layer 3. The postal forwarding request. Not my hand. Leland laid it beside a check I wrote in 1988 for shop rent, which he had in his files. God bless a man who never throws anything away, and even from the doorway you could see it. My L has had the same broken back for 60 years. That one stood up straight as a school child. Layer 4. Leland set down the fee agreement, face up, and he read the notes column. Family motivated. Move before September. Confirm no third-party fiduciary on file. And that is when it stopped being about me. Randy turned in my chair and looked at Brock Tillman, and he said, in a voice I have not heard out of him since he was 14 and had wrecked something, "What is that?" Brock said, "That is a standard engagement document." Randy said. It says move before September. I never said September. You said September. You said if we did not get it done before the fall, the window would close. Brock said. Randall, I would not discuss this here. And Randy said, real quiet, you told me my father was at risk. Here is where Krista Prewitt stepped forward and set a folder on my counter next to Leland's. A cheap plastic one, the kind they sell at the dollar store. Her hands were going. She said, Cy, I printed these 3 weeks ago and I have carried them in my car every day since and I have been sick. Emails. Brock Tillman to my stepson going back to last September. Prospecting language. Widowed father, 76, owns commercial real estate free and clear, no advisor of record. A line about how the daughter-in-law was the soft spot and needed to be brought along. And a paragraph about how the cleanest path with a resistant senior is what he called family-initiated protective planning, and how the courts in these little counties, and I will quote this part exactly because I've read it 200 times, rarely dig past the family story. Rarely dig past the family story. That, right there, is what I want every one of you to hear tonight. That sentence is a business model. There are people who make a living off the space between how much a family loves you and how little a court has time to check, and they do not come at you with a crowbar. They come at you through the one person in your life whose good intentions can be steered. Lyle Dooms came out of the back room then, and he was polite as a deacon. He identified himself, and he told Brock Tillman that the prosecutor's office would be requesting his firm's complete file on the Bellamy engagement, and he asked Randy, real gentle, Sir, would you be willing to come talk with me next week with a lawyer of your own? Randy said yes, before Brock could stop him. That is the one thing I will carry with me out of that whole morning. He said yes, right away. Then Randy Prewitt stood up out of chair number 2 in a shop full of the people who raised him, and he looked at me, and his chin went to pieces. He said, I filed a paper that says you cannot think. I said, yes, you did. He said, I drove you to that clinic. I said, yes, you did, and you bought me a milkshake. And he broke. 54 years old, regional manager, truck out front, standing in a barbershop crying in front of Dub Cutler, he said, I have not been able to sleep since Easter. I told myself the whole time that I was doing it before something bad happened, and I said the words out loud so much that I quit hearing them. Nobody in that room said a thing. 12 people had the grace to let it be quiet. Then he said, Pop! I have not called you Pop since February. I said, I noticed, son. I noticed every single time. Now. I could have stopped there. I had the room. In a small town, that is a loaded gun, and any man who tells you he does not know it is lying to you. Instead, I said, everybody, thank you for coming. Alan, there is one more cup in the pot. And I opened the door, and I let my town go on about their Saturday. Because a man's family should not get skinned in public 1 minute longer than it takes to tell the truth. The truth took 11 minutes. Everything after that would have just been me enjoying myself. When it was down to family, I turned the sign, and I put the pot back on. And then I told them about the well. Behind my shop, under a limestone slab and 40 years of pokeweed, there was a hand-dug well from 1904, 31 feet of rock laid up by hand, and the water in it was the sweetest in Dennard County. Half of Main Street drew off it before the town put in the tower. In 1952, the fellow who ran the garage 2 doors down poured a barrel of drained crankcase oil down that well one night because it was dark and the well was handy and he did not want to haul it. He did not hate anybody. He was tired, and it was late, and the well was right there. My daddy and 4 other men spent 11 days trying to save it, bailing by hand with a bucket on a rope until their palms split. It never did come back right, and that man apologized. To my father, to the church, to everybody on the street, and he meant every word of it, and I believe to this day he was a decent man having a bad year. The apology did not clean the water. You cannot poison a well by being sorry to it afterward. You keep the cap on, before, every day. In the good years, when nothing is wrong and nobody is watching, and it feels like a wasted afternoon. I told Randy, you did not steal from me. There is no money missing. But you spent 4 months quietly taking the cap off my life, 1 bolt at a time, and if a man like Brock Tillman had gotten 2 more months, there would not have been anything left in me worth drawing up. And it would not have been because you hated me. It would have been because you were tired, and the well was right there. He said, what do I do? I said, first thing Monday morning, you dismiss that petition, in writing, with the court, and you send me a copy. Second, you sit down with Mr. Dooms and you tell him the whole truth, and you do not shade 1 inch of it to make yourself look better, because that is the only way you get to keep your own name. He said, and after that, and I told him the truth. I said, after that, son, I do not know. That is not a punishment. It is just honest. Trust is not a light switch. It is a well. It comes back slow if it comes back at all, and nobody gets to be told the day. Then Brock Tillman tried to leave, and I will tell you the last thing I said to him, because I have been waiting a year to say it to somebody's face. He said something about how he had only ever tried to help this family, and I said, Mr. Tillman, I have shaved 12,000 men in this room. A man's face tells the truth about 10 seconds before his mouth catches up. Do not come back to my town. He did not. Here is what happened after, and it is quieter than you might want, and I make no apology for that. Quiet is what I was after the entire time. The petition was dismissed on the 16th of June. Voluntary dismissal by the petitioner, 2 pages. Leland put a copy in the file, and I put a copy in a shoebox, which is where important things live at my house, and I am too old to change. The prosecutor's office kept a file open a good while on Brock Tillman's firm. Last I heard from Lyle Dooms, 2 other families and 2 other counties had come forward about the same playbook, and that is the part of all this that lets me sleep. It was never really about my 2 buildings. It was a route he had driven before and meant to drive again. As for Randy, the prosecutor did not charge him because I asked them not to. That was not softness, and I want to be plain about it. The signature on those forms was typed into a website by a man who believed he had a right to be standing there. And Lyle told me, the hard part in a case like that is proving what was in a man's head. I would rather spend my last years with a son who confessed than a stepson with a record and a grudge. That was my call. Some folks will disagree with me, and I would drink coffee with any of them. One thing did change on account of it. Bonnie Speck added a line to the credit union's new account paperwork. 1 question for every member past 65. Is there anyone you want us to call if somebody starts asking about your accounts? She calls it the Bellamy line, which embarrasses me, and I have asked her twice to quit, and she has not. Alan Woolsey never did charge me for those pills. Krista and I have breakfast every other Wednesday at the truck stop by the highway. She told me the whole of it over the first one. Her own grandmother went through something ugly out in Kansas, and the lesson her mother took from it was that the family who moves first is the family who saves you, and she carried that into my life like a jar she never once thought to look inside of. She said, I confuse being useful with being right. I have chewed on that sentence more than anything else anybody said to me all year. Randy comes to the shop on Saturdays now. Not to talk, he sweeps. First time he did it, in July, I nearly said something smart. He came in about noon, took the broom off the nail, and swept hair for an hour without a word, the same as he did when he was 11 years old for $1. Then he hung the broom back up and said, See you next week, Pop, and left. He has done it near about every Saturday since. Some weeks, that is the whole conversation. It is more than I expected, and I have decided to let it be enough for now. And in September, my Katie started barber school in Springfield, paid for by the Fern Bellamy Fund. You think about that a minute. The money my stepson went looking for, the money in the leather folder with the question mark by it, had already been given away 8 years before he ever wondered about it, and it came back around and put his own daughter through school. His mother did that. From 3 years in the ground, that woman reached up and settled the whole account. Katie comes home most weekends and works chair number 2, which is not my thinking chair anymore. It is hers. She is fast, and she is better with the little boys than I ever was, and she has her grandmother's way of getting a whole life story out of a man in 20 minutes. 2 weeks ago, I gave her my daddy's razor. Bone handle, his initials scratched in the tang with his own pocket knife, and the strop that is hung on that hook since before there was a stoplight in this town. I put them in her hands on a Saturday evening with the fan still turning, and she cried, and I did not because I had practiced. I told her the same thing my father told me. The leather does not sharpen it, honey. Nothing soft ever sharpened anything. What the leather does is straighten. Every ordinary day of honest work rolls that edge over just a little, and it still looks fine in the mirror, and it will tear a man's face before it ever tells you it has gone bad. So you stand here every morning before the lights come on, and you straighten what yesterday bent. A name works exactly the same way. I will not pretend I understand everything that happened to me this year, but I know this much. Nobody came for my money, somebody came for my say, and the reason he almost got it was not that he was clever. It was that he was in a hurry, and a hurried man will believe anything that gets him moving, especially if it sounds like love. So let me leave you with the only 3 things I know. If somebody who loves you starts making your life smaller and calling it safer, that is worth one honest look, not a fight. A look. Ask them to say out loud what they are protecting you from, and then ask who benefits if you say yes. If you have papers to put in order, do it in a good year, on an ordinary afternoon when nothing hurts and nothing is on fire. Sit down with a real lawyer in your own state, not a folder with a brass corner and a percentage on the back page, and put down in your own hand who speaks for you if you cannot. Name somebody. Say it plain. The paper you sign while your hand is steady is the only voice you have got in a room you are not in. And if a card ever beeps at you in front of your whole town, the shame belongs to whoever switched it off. Not 1 ounce of it belongs to you. I open at 6:30. Coffee is free, the cut is $18, and the striped pole out front turns because my daddy wound it up in 1946 and I have never once let it stop. This is Cy Bellamy from Walnut Gap, Missouri. Ghost drop your name while your hand is still steady, and whatever the day bent in you, get it standing back up straight before the lights come on tomorrow.